Yeah. If you want to read Puzzle about the Fixity of the Past. Okay. Forthcoming analysis. Sounds good to me. So this is the paper. Let's update the stream stuff. Thank you for the find, Vbot. And yeah, so paper's in chat. Cool. All right, so yeah. Well, I'll just leave it white for now. So we got Puzzle About the Fixity Pass by Fabio Lampert, forthcoming in analysis. By the way, I think it's really cool that you do this. I don't know anyone else that has read so many philosophy articles on Twitch. I don't know anyone that's read any articles on Twitch, as far as I know. I'm the only one. I mean, Aristotle has read short papers, not like he's read articles, not even, but he doesn't read like straight up like research papers usually. I've seen people read other things, but not usually academic philosophy stuff. Yeah, like why I do the things I do is a much more at the start of the pandemic, I was like, well, being me, I'm like, well, what was the single dumbest, stupidest thing I could possibly do with my time? And I had always considered like maybe doing some philosophy. I've always thought about public philosophy. I've done other public philosophy things in the past, and I was like, well, what's a dumb thing to do is let's go be like Nietzsche. We'll run to the marketplace and proclaim God is dead. So how do you do that in pandemic times? You can't go to the marketplace, and who the hell would care if you yelled God was dead nowadays? You'd be laughed at. It wouldn't even be like in Nietzsche's time where they thought he was weird. They would just be like, shut up and go away, kid. So I go to Twitch, which is the gaming marketplace of the world, to go find out what people want to talk about and watching video games. I'm going to go treat academic philosophy like it's a video game. And yeah, and that's how I got Philosophy Roulette. So yeah, and all the things I do is like, takes time and effort to think out how to get this stuff working. So it's perfect. It needs work. It needs a lot of work to make it better. I don't expect that this is going to be like wildly popular. It's never going to get like mass popularity, but like it's providing a service to the profession. People always like it when you read their papers. I used to be nicer. I'm less nice at the moment since I things have been shitty by me, and I'm just like I used to always be like super positive and not try to be as like critical. Like the last paper where I'd be like, look, I think this is like just wrong about humanity. I'd say, well, look, in the area of like this sort of philosophy, I'd say this is like excellent for this sort of narrow scope. Now I'm just like, this does not apply to people. Like, it just doesn't. It applies to moral saints, and that's like the only time like this is going to come up, really. So difference in perspective at the moment. So, but like things are changing, if be it like little bits and slowly. But yeah. Let's jump into a puzzle about the fixity of the past by Fabio Lampert. Yeah, one of these days someone will call me out on my bullshit. One of these days. Introduction. It is widely held that an agent S is able to perform an action only if it is possible for S to perform it. In other words, S is only able to phi if there is a possible world in which S phi's. And already we are in like nasty analytic philosophy. This is going to be amazing with too many formulas. Awesome. This is this type of philosophy I do, by the way, when I'm doing stuff. Usually somewhat technical. This is much philosophy. This much is philosophy orthodoxy. Yes, it is. Like, this is what people talk about a lot. But not any possible world will do to bear witness to the claim that S is able to phi. So if S is a tree and phi is falling in the forest, so the tree falls in the forest, the question is, what possible world will you hear it? A number of philosophers also contend that in order for S to be able to phi, for to hear a tree falling in the forest, say in the actual world, a possible world bearing witness to this claim must be exactly like the actual world until the very moment or a bit before S phis. For despite all the things one is able to do in a given situation, no one is able to do something that would require the past to have been different from how it actually is. Wait, what is this? For despite all the things one is able to do in a given situation, no one is able to do something that would require the past to have been different. I don't know. I can think of very weird metaphysics where it is, but for the most part, no one can require the past being different to do something. This principle of the fixity of the past has been articulated and defended by philosophers in various ways, playing a crucial role in arguments for logical and theological fatalism and for the incompatibility of causal determinism and the ability to do otherwise. One among many ways of formulating this principle more precisely is as follows. For any action phi, agent S times t and t prime, where t is before t prime, and possible world W, S is able at first time to do the thing phi, and at t prime only in W, and S is able to phi at those times only if there's a possible world W prime with the same past as that of the regular world up into which t in which S phis at t prime. So there's two worlds, and basically you have to have the same past for the thing to be possible. So in one world it happens, in one world it doesn't, but like it has to have that past for that thing to happen. Okay. The author says, I will argue that this principle is at odds with the standard views about knowledge and the semantics for actually. The principle of bivalence, according to which every proposition is either true or false, will be assumed throughout the argument. Okay, so no things that are true and false at the same time. Okay, the argument. First, a lemma is required. Let box A and K stand for necessarily, actually, and it was, is, or will be known that, respectively, while horseshoe is the material conditional. Then Q implies P, implies P, and actually P implies necessarily that actually P, and necessary that it will be known that P implies actually P implies is necessary that is known that actually P implies P. One is a tautology and is in classical. This is a tangible manifestation of overthinking. Yeah, what this is over-engineering the thought. Yeah, I don't know what overthinking is. Over-engineering. Like, do you actually need a logical proof to show what they want? I can guarantee you no. But they've done a logical proof to show what they want to show, and then they want to make some hay off the fact that they can derive their conclusion using formulas. So one is a tautology in classical propositional logic. So that just means this is always true in classical logic, and that's true, it is. Two is an axiom of standard modal logics of actually. And three is the orthodox principle. Oh, I'm sure, of course, formal logic has many advantages. We'll see what this author is trying to do with it. Three is the orthodox principle that knowledge is necessarily factive. So if you know it, then it is true. It's a fact. That's what it is. If it's necessary that if you know something, then the thing is the case. So if I know it is raining out, then it is raining out. Yeah, it decreases vagueness and ambiguity. Yeah, it locks you into the structure. And so all and only what you are proving is what's getting proved. And so there is no vagueness basically outside of like whatever you want. If you know way too much about the logic, then you can find more vagueness in it. But basically, for almost any purposes, you are locked into what the formula says. And so in some sense you are perfectly explicit when you were using formal logic. And so the question is, why is this person using formal logic for this? Do they need to be perfectly explicit? Well, we're going to find out. Okay, so basically this just all says, I can read this out, I will, but it's just saying the conclusion follows. The conclusion 4 follows from 1 to 3. So, I mean, this all goes down into there. Yeah, so from 1, one can derive necessarily next formula by the rule of necessitation, from which this one follows. Then you've got the modal axiom K, modus ponens. All right, yeah, so this is, I don't like reading this out. Viewbot Prime says, do you know why 2 is an axiom of modal logic? Seems weird to say that it follows from the fact that something is the case that is necessarily the case. No, it says actually P, then it's necessarily actually P. So if something is let's see, how do I say this right? You can add boxes in front of, you can just add boxes. If it's the case in a world, then it has to be the case in the world. It's necessarily the case in that world. All right. So this is one of these, when you have like an actual world, then it has to actually be necessitated in that world because the world actually is that way. And so the history, this is where they're getting the history claim from. It's necessary that in the actual world that this happened because that is how the actual world is. And this is why I made that very short comment earlier. You can attack these things. You can, and the logicians do attack all of these axioms. It's just that a lot of people find some of these things reasonable, and then they use them, and then they can prove stuff with them. And so that's why they're the axioms. These are what people like to use, and they think, and you can derive good results with them. But yeah, there is still ways to attack this stuff. Okay, but yeah, this whole paragraph here just says for given 1, 2, and 3 and some standard background assumptions follows logically. Okay, from the main argument, assume the following 3 premises, all of which are evaluated at the actual world where t is before or equal to the next time t prime, and then again with 2 primes. So s is actually phi-ing at the last time. So s is able to is able at the time just before the final time to not yet do the thing at the next time. So up until the moment before the time, it doesn't have to do it. And it was known that S actually did the thing at the time. And if and only if it did, only if, not if and only if, actually did the thing at the last time, only if did it at that time. So like in the actual world, it did it if it did it at that time. And it's known beforehand. So in the future, if it does it at that time, it only does it then at that time. All right, so premise 5 requires that S does the thing at a certain time in the actual world, while premise 6 requires additionally that S was able to do otherwise. Say I have just raised my hand, then I have actually raised my hand, but I was able to do otherwise. For example, if I was able to put my hand down instead. So it is true that I have actually raised my hand and that I was able to do otherwise. This is enough in order to satisfy 5 and 6. Now say that Now say that the day before I raised my hand, you came to know the following. Fabio will actually raise his hand tomorrow only if he will raise his hand tomorrow. Of course, you were able to know this in advance and irrespective of whether I actually did end up raising my hand or not. For if P is the contingent truth that Fabio will raise his hand tomorrow, that you came to know is the conditional actually P implies P, a contingent but a priori truth. You could have come to know this, for instance, by simply thinking about semantics while using my raising hand as an example. This is enough in order to satisfy 7. Now, given the formalism introduced before, 8 follows from 4 and 5. Necessarily, if it was, is, or will be known that S actually does the thing at time only if they do it at the time, then S does the thing at the time. 9 follows from this stuff. 9 says there is a possible world W prime with the same past as the actual up to the time just before it happens, in which S does not do the thing at the later time. Obviously, though, given 9 and 10 also holds, it is not the case that S did the thing at the later time in this other world. So they could always... There's 2 worlds. There's the actual world where the thing happens, but there's another world where it just doesn't happen and everything was exactly the same up until that point. But since W and the actual world share the same past up to T prime, it follows 11 follows from 7 and 9. It was known that S actually does the thing at the time, only if it did at beforehand in the second world where we thought it didn't happen. So if it does the thing, only if it does the thing, it was known at some prior time. Now clearly 12 follows from 11. It was, is, or will be known that S actually does the thing at the future time only if it did it at the future time in that other world. However, 13 follows from 8 and 12, contradicting 10. So S did the thing at the later time in the other world, which we had said earlier it did not do, because it did not do that. Okay, we have thus arrived at a contradiction given FP for the trio 5, 6, and 7. It is therefore not possible for all of them to be true. What could have gone wrong? The argument does not appear to have any logical flaws, hence to avoid the above contradiction, it seems that one will have to deny at least one of the premises, but which one? Valvier says, do you believe possible semantics are very helpful in understanding real-world phenomena? Nope. They're a useful tool. It depends what your depends on what real world phenomena you're talking about. If you're talking about sort of like a game theory sense where you're trying to map out different scenarios, then yeah, super helpful. You can look at all the different worlds, all the different things that you're doing. If you're talking about metaphysics, then probably not, because they have metaphysics of worlds built in. And so if you're talking about like understanding real world phenomena, well, what kind of phenomena are you talking about? Like if you're looking at like military planning, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, that's real world phenomena. You can look at all the possible worlds and all these things happening. The semantics themselves, like what's all this stuff mean? Mostly there's a philosopher's game. Like you'd have to give me an example of what you mean by real world phenomenon. What can we do with possible world semantics? Yeah, like you can also think of this stuff in terms of psychology. Like if you think of possible worlds and sort of like different brain states you could get yourself into, that might be very helpful in terms of as a psychological exercise. So like say you want to think about yourself like if you had a different kind of life, that would be a different world that you were living in, and maybe you could do some analysis of things that way. But like if you're gonna talk about like the semantics of using possible worlds to interpret modals like this, depends like what you're really doing with them. Like I think they're helpful sometimes. Other times it's like nah. Just the answer is no for the most part. Most philosophy, like once you get to the like too abstract level, does not really have everyday uses unless you're talking about like understanding some sort of like bigger picture going on, which can help you psychologically. But like I don't know what you're sort of worried about in terms of real world evolve yourself. So that's all. But yeah, does philosophy really tell you about like everyday life? Nah. I mean, it helps you think about the world, but like is there any given example I could tell you about? Like no, I like telling stories where the few times it's worked out well. All right, so here's an example. Here's one of the few times logic helped me. So explicitly helped me, I should say. So I used to work in a hospital many years ago, and so in hospitals they have very big elevators because you have to have gurneys in the elevators because so it's like the elevators are just there's a lot of depth to the elevator. Like, it goes all the way back. So I get into the elevator and I hear somebody yell, "Hold the elevator!" Coming down. They're running down the hall. I hear them running. And so I'm all the way in the back of the elevator. Like, I'm all the way in the back. And so it's like 6 feet, like 7 feet before me in there. And so they get to the elevator. No. And what happens is, like, am I going to go push the button? So I have to get up leaning off the wall. And the person slows down. Like, they stop running. They start walking. And I don't get off the back wall. And the person gets to the elevator and the door's still open. They look at me and it's clear that I had not pushed the button because there's a full 7 feet between me and the button in the front of the elevator. And they go to me, "Why didn't you hold the door for me?" And I said, "You slowed down. You knew you were going to make it." And the guy looks at me and goes, "Huh, deductive logic. Wouldn't have thought it." And that was it. I mean, that was like, I got to use logic. So yeah, that's a everyday real world phenomenon. I didn't have to get off leaning, so good times. But yeah, if you have like specific questions about when you can apply the logic, like, let me know. But off the top of my head, possible worlds, yeah. Okay, so where did this argument go wrong according to them? Because basically it says if you have two different worlds and one thing happens in one world and the second world is exactly the same up until the point right before something else happens, then the thing has to happen. Okay. And they say, before examining some possible responses to the argument, let's consider a more informal version of it that it should make its counterintuitive consequence more pronounced. Consider then the following scenario. Smith and Jones have both applied for a certain job and a decision is yet to be made. Smith knows that he will actually be offered the job only if he will be offered the job, though this trifling piece of knowledge has no effect on his nerves. The final decision on who gets offered the job is entirely up to Alice, the company's CEO. A week later, after careful consideration, Alice thinks both candidates are equally strong, competent, and appropriate for the job, though she must now make a choice. She must offer the job to either Smith or Jones, and because Alice thinks the candidates are too similar, she decides to choose between them at random. Say Alice is about to make her choice. Is she able to offer Smith the job? Intuitively, yes. Is she able to offer Jones the job? Likewise, the answer appears to be yes. So whatever she is about to do, she is now able to do otherwise. Suppose then Alice will actually offer Smith the job. If she was indeed able to do otherwise, given the above argument, there is a possible world W prime with the same past as that of the actual world up to T, say the moment in which Alice makes her choice, in which she does not offer Smith the job, say she offers it to Jones instead. And since she will actually offer Smith the job, it follows from 4 that necessarily if Smith knows that he will actually be offered the job, only if he will be offered the job, then he will be offered the job. But Smith came to know this before T, and so W prime is a world in which Smith knows that he will actually be offered the job only if he will be offered the job, from which it follows that W prime is also a world in which he will be offered the job. Contradiction. Because both of them know the same stuff, and so they both know that they would possibly be able to get the job knowing the things that they do. Therefore, there is no possible world W prime with that same past as that of the actual world up to the same time in which Alice does not offer Smith the job. A similar argument can be made if we suppose Alice will actually offer Jones the job and the scenario is modified accordingly so that Jones is now the one who gets to know the relevant a priori truth. Taken as an argument against 6, for instance, the present argument tells us that if anyone knew in advance that actually P only if P, where P is in any true in the actual world proposition about future actions S is not able to do otherwise. But this is unacceptable. Evolve Yourself says, I'm so used to seeing possible world semantics integrated into philosophical literature, and I am not sure that it is always helpful. Sometimes it takes the reader farther away from the salient point that the author is arguing for. If I recall, David Lewis started the trend and lots of philosophers jumped on the bandwagon. Yes, I completely agree. You have to sort of buy the metaphysics, and it's very powerful because you get a lot of good results that you want, but how much did those results actually mean something because you basically relied on a lot of machinery, and the machinery does not necessarily correspond to existing in the actual world. And so, but because you could get such good results, it seemed like the cool thing to do. And that's, philosophers like results. They thought they had cool results, and so it's the cool thing to do. So, continuing the paper, it might well be that tomorrow Biden will actually have ice cream for lunch, but he surely has the ability to do otherwise, even if I know today that he will actually have ice cream for lunch tomorrow, only if he will do just so. To put it plainly, whatever Biden is able to do tomorrow does not depend on what I can know about today, know about him from the armchair. In light of such consequences, one does well in examining multiple ways of responding to this argument. All right, let me just go look at some of the structure of this again. I want to see something here. Because these things, if it was known that this known is very hard. This known that, like, if you know hypothetical things in the past, that's, I think that's where this goes wrong. Because how do you know things in the future? You're saying you know a tautology, but that's introducing information about the future that you could not have known, actually, in the past. Now, could you say, well, it's a tautology? Yeah, but there's information embedded in there. So this is already something that I find a little bit worrisome, because, like, I say, well, this whole thing is a hypothetical. There's nothing, you're not gaining any new information. That's not true, because when the time comes, then all of a sudden, then you have all this, like, embedded information about the future. So it's like, I was in a trial once, not in a trial, I was in a jury selection once, and the scummy, dirty, evil defense lawyer kept trying to say, hypothetically, if there was blunt force trauma to the head in this and that way, what would you have to say about that? And it was obvious that they were trying to introduce information that would be released later in the trial in the jury selection, because the defense lawyer wanted to see how we'd react to it. And that was trying to see how we were reacting to some very gruesome details. But it was a hypothetical. It was not actually, the lawyer wasn't actually wasn't asserting the thing, but information was getting introduced. And the judge eventually threatened the lawyer with contempt of court if he kept doing it, because it was obvious that he was trying to, get a rise out of the potential jury pool. So this is the sort of thing, like, there's weird things that, like, you can embed tautologies, and even though classically nothing has happened there, that doesn't actually mean that nothing has happened. You have introduced structures that would not have otherwise existed. Yeah. So you ask where logic helps, and sometimes in the courtroom, hypotheticals are not always so hypothetical. You can also think about threatening someone. Like, imagine I did this to you. Wouldn't it be better? Yeah, that's right. Content is embedded in terms of itself. Like, you could also threaten someone, say, look, you wouldn't want this hypothetical thing to happen to your business or to your family. Like once you start introducing these ideas, you're not merely making hypotheticals. Like, there's more to it than that. And so this is where the logic and reality separate themselves. Okay, so possible responses from the author. Let us first take a closer look at some of the premises in the knowledge lemma leading to 4. Yeah, see, this is exactly where I thought they would go. The knowledge bit. That's one of the danger spots. One is a tautology, and as such is unimpeachable. That's true. Like, that's just sort of standard fare for classical logic. And you can argue against that stuff, but that's beyond the scope of what's going on here. Some may object to by arguing that actually does not display the required rigidifying reading in natural language. All the same, there is clearly a well-known philosophical reading of actually that is modeled in the usual possible world semantics with an operator that satisfies 2. Yeah, like 2 is I mean, this is one of the problems. I'd like to be able to copy a bit of like this stuff from up here. Like this stuff is kind of standard fare. This 1 and 2. It'd be hard to like, you can argue against them, but like there's a whole bunch of people that do seem to accept it. So you can just stick to that crowd. All right. With respect to 3, its rejection seems implausible. Of course, it might be well that what is indicated by the present argument is that there could be knowledge of falsehoods, but this would be difficult to motivate, as there would have to be significant reason for denying 3 instead of FP, for instance. And FP is, what was FP? Is the whole thing? Where is FP? One sec. What is FP exactly? Oh, FP is this, okay, the whole thing. Yeah, FP is the whole thing, saying then you have to... Okay, so they're saying, would you deny this knowledge thing over the whole thing that says if you got 2 possible worlds, then one could do one thing, one could do something else. All right, so would you deny 3 about knowledge instead of the whole thing? Moreover, the main argument can be reformulated with different verbs that are likewise plausibly factive, such as establishes, and the premise would have been just as compelling. Fair enough. Yet another response would involve rejecting what Chalmers calls the face value view of actually. Okay, so this person is going after actually, the word actually. Consider the proposition expressed by actually P, where P is any proposition. According to the face value view of actually, the proposition was, is, or will be known just in case what is expressed by knowing actually P is true, and it is necessary just in case what is expressed as by box necessarily actually P is true. By rejecting the face value view, one could block the knowledge lemma without allowing for counterexamples to 3. Chalmers sketches various alternative treatments of actually for those who may want to reject the face value view, including an ambiguity analysis on which actually expresses distinct propositions in epistemic and modal contexts, and a pluralist view on which readings of actually may satisfy different premises of the argument. I will neither repeat nor discuss those alternatives any further, though some may be live options for those who would like to hold on to 3 and FP. Notwithstanding, all that is needed here is one reading of actually on which the argument is sound, a philosophical reading that suggests itself, for instances, in this very world. Yeah, so when you're saying actually in the world, the actual world. And so that makes it sound because it says, look, if you just restrict yourself to this world where everything is happening here, then what's the problem? It's just this world. That's how things are. Okay, perhaps instead of rejecting one or more of the premises of the knowledge lemma, defenders of FP might target some step of the main argument, thereby holding on to the standard semantics for actually and the assumption that knowledge is necessarily factive. Oh, by the way, I deny facticity. In general, just so you guys know, I deny facticity. I don't hold that the world is made up of facts. So, like, this whole thing is just hypothetical to me. It was a great day the day I denied facticity. The world is not factive. But continuing. Premise 5 says that S actually phi's at the later time, where actually is formalized with the A. As such, 5 appears unobjectionable. So it says, look, the tree fell in the forest in the actual world. That's all we're saying. S is the tree, and it actually fell in the forest at time T prime. T double prime. But given 6, the argument also requires that S be able at the time just before it fell to refrain from falling at that time. And some might adhere to a strong indeterministic view according to which S, the tree, is able to not fall at the time before it fell, refrain from falling at the time, only if it is not yet true that S will do that thing at the later time. A case in point, Alice is able to offer Jones the job only if it is not yet true that she will actually offer Smith the job. A view of this sort would require that the future be open in a very strong sense, according to which some propositions about the future are neither true nor false. To be sure, this view is not standard among defenders of arguments for logical or theological fatalism, nor is it standard among defenders of arguments for incompatibility of causal determinism and the ability to do otherwise. And those are arguments in which FP plays a prominent role. Nevertheless, this strong indeterminist view does provide a way out of those arguments. For instance, if it is not yet true that Alice will offer Smith the job, then God does not foreknow this, hence Alice may still be able to do otherwise. And this is what I was saying about the knowledge thing earlier, when I thought the author was doing. If there is no way to foreknow something, you can't say that even if it was like you're building in the structure later, God does not foreknow it. So that is what the author is saying here, that like when I was saying you were building in the structure, well, you're not actually building in the structure you do know, because that's not allowed. You can't even foreknow the structure, and so Alice, the person, can do otherwise, because even though you're saying it looks like it logically is a hypothetical, you don't actually know it. So this is what I was saying earlier. Are there plausible responses to the argument that do not require denial of bivalence? So yeah, this is also saying, look, it's not one or the other. So, but that's denying bivalence and the two objects that make it a hypothetical tautology. One could reject 6 by claiming that human beings do not have the ability to do otherwise. I guess I reject bivalence in some cases. Like, I'm non-classical logician, so I deny bivalence. And so if you want to stick to classical stuff, that's what this person is doing here. I don't stick to classical, so I don't actually feel the need to, I have no problem denying bivalence. Okay, so one could reject 6 by claiming that human beings do not have the ability to do otherwise. One could do that, for instance, by arguing that causal determinism is incompatible with the ability to do otherwise, while arguing further that causal determinism is true. Viewbot says it doesn't seem that counterintuitive to deny bivalence for propositions about the future. Yeah, I think it sounds perfectly reasonable. But they're saying, well, why wouldn't you? Well, if you want causal determinism to be true, like they say right here, then you won't, then you don't do that. But like, why would you want to? Well, maybe you really like causal determinism. Alternatively, one could endorse theological fatalism. So yeah, if you say God knows everything, then you also can't get away with it. Arguing that the existence of an omniscient God who foreknows the future is incompatible with human beings possessing the ability to do otherwise, while arguing further that an omniscient God does in fact exist. Yeah, so God did not give us free will at that point. Still, this does not diminish the strength of the present argument. Once more, principles like FP that says you could have done otherwise play a prominent role in the arguments just mentioned, but more importantly, the present argument assumes neither causal determinism nor the existence of an omniscient God. Thus, the argument should be puzzling even for those who already reject 6. If S was not able to do otherwise, it surely is not because someone already knew a triviality such as what is involved in 7. Yeah, because, look, their argument was logical, and it has nothing to do with your position on God or causal determinism. Like, if you accept the logic they have accepted, then the conclusion just follows. But like I said, the way I get out of this, like, I don't even have to worry about this stuff because I deny bivalence, and they don't want to do that. Okay. A rejection of 7 is furthermore difficult to motivate in light of the standard reading of actually. It is widely believed that the many propositions such as actually P imply P can be known a priori, even when they are only contingently true. An expected response from defenders of principles like FP would consist in denying 11 instead. The defender of FP might contend that the fact that it was known that S actually phi's at the later time only if phi does do the thing at the later time, and you could know that ahead of time, it is past relative to the time before, at most in a qualified sense, according to which it should not be held fixed by FP. So basically, yeah, so you could say maybe this knowing this beforehand shouldn't be held fixed for like any time prior, even if it does follow logically. That's interesting. But yeah, it's like a qualified sense that you know stuff. One of the well-known responses for the problem of theological fatalism involves the adoption of a twofold distinction between facts. This is the distinction originally inspired by William of Ockham between hard and soft facts about times. A hard fact about time is a temporally intrinsic fact that time, and so it is genuinely and strictly about that time. By contrast, a soft fact about time is a relational fact about that time, and so it is also about some other time. An alchemist will contend that hard facts about pastimes are always held fixed in evaluating what an agent is able to do in a given situation, and that soft facts about pastimes need not, in general, be fixed. It is controversial whether any adequate and precise characterization of the distinction between temporally intrinsic and temporally relational facts about times have ever been offered. But it might be useful to think of soft facts about the past as facts that somehow depend on the future in order to obtain. Hard facts about the past, by contrast, display no such dependence. For instance, while H is a hard fact about 1980, S is only a soft fact about 1980, as it depends on the future relative to 80 in order to attain. So H is John Lennon was shot in 1980, and S is John Lennon was shot in 1980, 41 years before I typed this sentence in 2021. Moreover, I was very much able to prevent S from having obtained until moments ago, as I was able to type a different sentence. So there was no reason to think S should have been held fixed in evaluating what I was able to do until shortly before I typed that sentence. So consequently, the alchemist will contend that the fixity of the past should be understood more properly as the fixity of the hard past, in which FP should be reformulated accordingly. For any action phi, agent S times T and T prime, where T is before T prime in possible world W, S is able to T at S is able at the first time to phi at later time T prime only in W, only if there's a possible world W prime with that same hard past as that of W up to T, in which S does the thing at the later time. So basically, you're saying they have the same hard past, but not the hypothetical future. This alchemist proposal is effective against the present argument, provided that the fact that it was known that S actually does the thing at the time only if S does the thing at the time beforehand, is only a soft fact about the time before that should not be held fixed in considering what S is able to do at the later time. Recall that 11 follows from 7 and 9, and that 9 follows from the whole thing. By adopting all these rules, but instead this alchemist view, you can effectively reject 9, since 9 does not follow from the alchemist viewpoint. Rather, what follows from the alchemist position is 9 prime. There is a possible world W prime with the same hard past as that of the actual world up until the moment before the thing happens, in which the agent does not do the thing at the later time. And the fact that it was known that S actually does a thing at the later time, only if it does it at T, is not a hard fact about T. 11 will not follow from 7 and 9 prime. The argument is blocked. So what of the alchemist's way out? So basically, yeah. So it's saying the hypothetical things, if you can't make the past depend on the future. No, you can't make the past depend on the future. You've gone the wrong way. The future only depends on the past, not the other way around. So that's what Occam is saying. Look, the future depends on the past, not the other way. So if you write logic in the other direction, then you've got yourself confused. Okay, there seems to exist an important distinction between, say, belief facts and knowledge facts, where the content of the attitude in question is about the future. Consider the following facts about time T. Smith believes at T that Alice will offer him the job in a week. Smith knows at T that Alice will offer him the job in a week. It appears that 14 is temporally intrinsic, a hard fact about T. Even if Smith's belief is about future, 14 does not seem to depend on it in order to obtain. But 15 tells us what 14 does and more, namely that Smith will be offered the job in a week. Whether 15 is a fact at T depends on what happens at a later time T, and so it appears to be a soft fact about T. Now consider the following fact about T. Smith knows at T that Alice will actually offer him the job in a week only if she will offer him the job in a week. Okay, so now it's this sort of tautological thing. Does 16 depend on the future in order to obtain? It might seem so on the surface, yet on closer inspection, 16 tells us nothing about Smith's career prospects. Whether it is a fact that Smith knows that a priori truth at T does not depend on whether he gets offered the job or not. In contrast to S and 15, it is not in virtue of how the future turns out that 16 counts as a fact at the time in question for Smith does not count as knowing that a priori truth at t in virtue of what happens in a later time. 16 therefore seems to display no dependence on the future. Because even if you're talking about future things, if you talk about them in a tautological way, it doesn't matter what time there is, even though it has a embedded future prospect. I'm not entirely sure about that, like, because it's like separating the logic and time, but like you can take that. That seems to make some sense. Like, why can we talk about hypotheticals that have nothing to do with reality? Say, like, I can talk about a galaxy very far away. It seems like it's okay, just in an abstract sense. Okay, but one might object on the grounds that 16 does not wear its softness on its sleeve. According to the knowledge lemma, if Alice will actually offer Smith the job in a week, then 16 strictly implies or entails the contingent truth that she will do just so. Thus, 16 should be counted as a soft fact about T after all. It depends on the future as it entails something about it. Yeah, so this is what I was saying. Like, you're still talking about the future, and there's entailments there. There's structure. Okay. If entailing something about the future is indeed sufficient for the relevant notion of dependence, then one may argue that 16 is a soft fact about the previous time t, and the same would apply for 7. However, this strategy faces several difficulties. First, note that the entailment in question is conditional on the fact that Alice will actually offer Smith the job in a week. That is, it does not obtain solely in virtue of the obtaining of 16. In this sense, 16 differs from 15, which alone entails something about the future. Likewise, S alone entails something about the future relative to the time when John Lennon was shot. 16 thus seems to differ substantially from paradigmatic soft facts. Second, one would need to motivate the view that 16 depends on the future in case Alice actually offers Smith the job, but not, say, in case she picks Jones. After all, 16 only entails that Alice will offer Smith the job in case she actually does so, and there is no reason to think that 16 depends on the future if it does not even entail something about it. You see, this is again a weird thing because, look, you've got all these structures. It says, well, look, if the hypothetical fails, then, well, what do you have? You have nothing. It says, well, these are like negative facts, negative entities. Then you might get into some weird questions about, look, you have all these entailments, these counterfactuals, if you will, or like negative potentialities. What are these things? These are negative objects, like the things that didn't detail because something didn't happen. But in some sense, it was already there in the logic, but it didn't actually do it. So you're saying there's no entailment there? It seems like there would have been an entailment. And so more is going on then in these cases. You got to be careful about these sorts of things when you're digging through these logics. Anywho, since moreover 16 may count as a fact at T regardless of whether Alice picks Jones or Smith, whether T entails something about the future under particular conditions would seem immaterial as to whether it is a fact. Third, well, that's because you're still looking at it just as the pure logic, because you could like switch out the embedded future terms. Not so sure that it makes sense if you're doing, but that's what you're saying. Like on the logic, it doesn't care that you're embedding future conditions into a tautology. Third, and more importantly, whether the notion of entailment plays any determining role in the distinction between hard and soft facts is notoriously controversial. In fact, entailment criteria for soft facthood have been subject to intense criticism by many champions of the Occam position. Proponents of arguments for logical and theological fatalism and for incompatibility of causal determinism and the ability to do otherwise in particular have long denied that entailing something about the future should be sufficient for soft facthood. There are multiple reasons, therefore, in support of the claim that 16 is plausibly a hard fact about T. By the same token, the fact that it was known that S actually does the thing at the later time, only if it does the thing at the later time, if you know that at the previous time, seems to be a hard fact about T, so 11 appears to follow from 7 and 9 prime. After all, endorsing the Occam version instead of the normal version of the you can do otherwise at a later time, thus seems to be ineffective against the present argument. There may well be other interesting ways of rejecting one or other step of the presenting argument while holding onto either the normal or the Occam modified version of this sort of fatalism, logical fatalism, though under the assumption that every proposition is either true or false, those will seem to involve rejecting either the standard semantics for actually or standard views about knowledge, such as that knowledge is necessarily factive and that one can know that actually P implies P when P concerns what someone is about to do. Yeah, like I said, I deny facticity. I deny bivalence. So, like, both of these things are out of the picture for me. So this is like, it's an interesting article, but it's just like, I've already rejected, like, for myself, a bunch of the things that you need to get this off the ground. All right, so conclusion. I have argued that the principle of the fixity of the past is at odds with the standard views about knowledge and the semantics for actually. But this principle, or its restriction to the hard past, plays a crucial role in arguments for logical and theological fatalism and arguments in favor of the incompatibility of causal determinism and the ability to do otherwise. Proponents of such arguments will have to reject the standard views about knowledge or the semantics of standard semantics for actually. Alternatively, they might try to find a revised principle of the fixity of the hard past that avoids the present argument and which is sufficiently strong for the formulation of their argument for fatalism, logical or theological, and incompatibilism. As for those who would like to reject such arguments for fatalism, logical or theological, and incompatibilism while accepting bivalence, they might do so by rejecting the principle of fixity of the hard past and endorsing the aforementioned standard views about knowledge as well as the standard semantics for actually. Yeah. So this is one of these fun things. It's like, look, the reason the person went technical here is because they're motivating the technical machinery against the standard views. And so it's saying, look, you have to get rid of one of these if you want to keep your arguments. And so it's putting this person's enemies against like a rock and a hard place. Either you have to reject your views or modify your views in a way you don't want to, or you have to modify your logic, which is most people don't want to do. The things I just said I do here, this puts me in a severe minority. Like, this is not what people do. People do not deny facticity, and people are mostly stick to classical logic, where every proposition is either true or false. So these are things that mostly don't happen. And after that, I don't give a rat's ass about this standard account of actually. So it's like this whole thing is out the window for me. It doesn't really matter. But most people don't want to do that. I'm already in the position where I don't care. I've already done that. So what do you do if you're stuck here? Where do you go? And I think this author has done a reasonably good job showing that, look, mostly you're screwed, or you're going to have to really dig your teeth into these arguments. Like, what do you want to go, as the author said, with Chalmers, and look at the different ways that you might interpret actually. You might want to reject the understanding of knowledge here. I also have a different understanding of knowledge. I wouldn't even endorse that, I'd endorse this usage of the logical operator. Like, if you know something, then it has to be true. So, necessarily if you know it, then it is the case. But I actually have extreme restrictions on things you know. So the idea that you're going to get the job would never count as something you would know. And so I would reject the kind of examples, all the examples that were of knowledge that were used in this paper. So if you're going to reject all the examples that were used in this paper, then again, it wouldn't apply to you. So you'd have to find something else that would count as knowledge. And I suspect if you were to find something else that counted as knowledge, this wouldn't sound like a problem anymore. So, I've got a radically different view of the way all of this stuff is set up. And so the fact that the logic falls out right here and you have a problem, not a problem for me. But if you use standard views of all this stuff, yes, what do you reject? So you can go pick one, find one you want. But the problem is, all these things right here, all this stuff on this page, most people accept this. And in that case, how do you hold on to your position? So they want to say that basically, if you are going to hold on to all these ideas, how do you say that it's possible that in one world, the actual world, something happened, but it was possible that it didn't? So you can't do it according to this argument. You're gonna have to find some other logic. Now, if I was more clever, could I get around this? Let me think for a minute. How clever am I, and can I actually get around this? I don't know if I can, off the top of my head. I'm going to probably try and look for someone to raid, too. I mean, I don't know if you guys have any thing to say about these things, but we raided Clubs last time. Clubs is cool. Infernal's up again. Floppy Jimmy's a good guy. Reaps. I don't know. I don't know him that well, but whatever. So let me think. Where do I think this... If I wanted to defend this stuff, where would I do it? Because you can't deny these things up here. These are too standard. I mean, there are people who deny one. You can deny one if you want. There are ways to do that, I think. But it's hard. And that would go bivalent. You probably deny valent. Yeah. It is I agree with you, Viewbot. I think it is a decent article. But this is it's sort of for people who are... This is for like serious people, like people who are seriously into this sort of literature, because your average person's not going to know enough of the background about the necessary, the box, like modal logic, the knowledge operators, things like that. So if you want to talk about this stuff, it's like, that's great, but like, it's not going to be for everybody. And the question is, what do these people get out of this? Well, like I said before, you put your competitors in a rock and a hard place. If they want to hold on to the sort of openness of the future that something could have happened otherwise, then you have to find what you want to reject. I told you, I've rejected, for myself, I've rejected a huge amount of stuff. It did make you curious about the notion of actual and modal logic. I find Axiom 2 suspect. Yeah, and the author took some care in saying that there was you could go look up this Chalmers bit. Where was that? Yeah, it was here. So they provide a reference. And so you could go look up all the things Chalmers said about it, and you could then reject the face value view, and then you'd block the knowledge lemma without allowing any counter examples. So, like, that is definitely a way to go, and you can think about, what does it mean when actually something... What does it mean that it actually happened? Like, is there some temporal thing built into actually, and so they're sneaking in, they're basically begging the question by saying actually something happened at this time? Is that different than saying it happened at the time? And when you say actually, have you snuck in some premises? Valvisa says David Chalmers is cool. I got to meet him a while back when he was president at Fermilab. Wow, that's cool. Fermilab, that's neat. I'm in New York. I've run into David Chalmers once or twice. I'm not like claiming to know him at all, but I've like definitely ran into him. And I agree, he is a cool guy. He's pretty nice. So yeah. When was the last time I saw him? Like, I mean, just saw, like, on like Zoom or something. I don't know. But yeah, he's around. He seems pretty good person. Oh, that was years ago last I saw him. Whatever. Yeah, there's people you can run into if you're in New York. So, I mean, nothing, of course, has happened lately due to COVID. And he was doing his... wow, he was trying to talk to physics people about physics. That's scary. Physics people are very, very, very scary and very, very, very serious about their physics. So... take some balls. I'm trying to just think of what do I hate? Like I said earlier, this sort of like building in these tautologies, you're building in structure that might be illegitimate. And then the fact that you are calling it a hypothetical with the sort of this known that, when did you know this thing? Well, you say you know it because it's a tautology, but that's like saying, like I said before, Like it's like I said with the example of the murder trial, if you knew all these details of the trial ahead of time, that there's something very suspicious about that. Like if you knew exactly, like if I were to tell you hypothetically that the murder weapon was at this very specific location that only the murderer knew about, then like and then it just turns out to be true. It seems like there's it's one of those like very suspiciously like it's overly specific and overly suspicious that you knew this sort of fact ahead of time. And so there's something a little creepy going on there when you can build in all the structure for free. So I don't like that. There's because then it gets pulled off by known in some sense. You've bracketed it. Oh wait, there's even something else there. Yeah. So you've got intentionality with the S going on here. They're hiding this information that it was known that like now intentionally. So this is not. Oh God, you could deal with this in intentional extensional theories. I wonder if that's what's going on here. So okay, let me explain this real quickly because we've got some philosophy heads in town in chat. This is what happened when they were talking about beliefs. Where is that belief thing? Because there's a difference between intentional and extensional logic, and this is where was that? It was like the S and the H. Where's S and H? Where's the S and the? Where's propositions S and H? Dagnabbit. So here's the thing. When we're talking about modals like knowledge and belief, those are talking about people's brain states. When we're talking about not modals like necessarily and like actually, you're talking about the world. It is notoriously difficult to square these two states. The intentional states about how people are viewing the world and then how you're talking about the world is in reality. So, dagnabbit, where am I? And so there is, here we go, S and H here. Oh, is this it or not? Where's the belief, not belief one? Here, okay, it was 14 and 15. So here's the thing. Smith believes that at T that Alice will offer him the job. This is inherently about someone's thought. You're talking about Smith. What Smith believes about the world. So what we're talking about, the logic here is of what's going on in Smith's head. Smith believes something, and that has no relation to reality, or potentially no relation to reality. If we say Smith knows something, then you can do that operation above where you say, well, it is known by anyone. It doesn't matter that was Smith. It is not about what Smith knows, really. It's about the state of the world because it's knowledge. And the fact that Smith is in this sentence is a red herring. So you are basically saying it is known that at time T, Alice will offer Smith the job in a week. And so you could say, look, something right here is going weird. You're using the two senses of you're using the two senses, the two intentionalities, intentionality and extensionality. And so you're using an ambiguity about what the logic is talking about to actually get a result. And so that's the thing. When you say that in this knowledge claim up here, it was known that this sort of thing, no, it was believed ahead of time, but it wasn't known. It was known in one sense in that you knew the logic, okay? But you're bracketing this statement as if it was intentional, because instead of saying that, you're saying, well, it was believed that this actually happened. No one actually believed this stuff, because no one actually believes these forms of things, because that didn't actually happen, because no one actually knew this. Like, it was not believed one way or the other. And so you've got some sort of weird thing switching back and forth between when you're saying it was known that, in the sense that like someone thought about it, but they didn't, like, they knew about the logical structure, they didn't know about the reality. But then you're saying, okay, but then if you actually they did actually know it, then that does fall out. But they had not yet been able to instantiate basically what these phi's are. So you've got quantifiers embedded in your modal statement here, and you're gonna have weird freaking problems when you have embedded quantifiers under modal operators, and you're using the modals in different ways. So this is, if you want to attack this on its own grounds, this is one way to do it. The intentional extensional distinction that is not well handled in the literature at the moment, and it is explicitly coming out in this 14 and 15 in this discussion here. And that was part of the problem, is that, you know, they argue that it did make sense. I'm not sure it did at this point. Let me go see again what it says. See, belief facts, knowledge facts, where the content of the attitude in question is about the future. So they're talking about the temporally intrinsic, but it's not. See, even if Smith's belief is about the future, it does not seem to depend on it in order to obtain. That's right, this is an intrinsic thing. But 15 tells us what 14 does, and more namely that Smith will be offered the job in a week. See, this is doing double duty. And so the question is, why are these the same thing? And so whether 15 is a fact at T depends on what happens in a time later than T, so it appears to be a soft fact about T. But you see, then they fall back into the soft fact stuff. The question is the knowledge operator doing the double duty about being an extensional thing in the world, or is it being used intentionally and talking about what Smith, how Smith is related to the world? Maybe you could do something there. So, I mean, this sentence here, Smith knows now that Alice will actually offer him the job in a week, only if she will offer him the job in a week. See, we've got this embedded, the embedded future quantifier over the job. So, and what Alice will do. Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. This modal knows, I don't buy exactly the I don't buy this interpretation of knowledge. So, anywho, if anyone has anything else to say, please let me